So the per head differences between the top and bottom 10% of CBV, it's about 250 to 270 euro in profit per head. So over 100 cattle, that's in the region of 25 to 27,000 difference in output and feed costs combined, which is quite substantial. Even if you only move from an average to good CBV, you're still talking many thousands of euro over a 100 head batch. So that's why we describe CBV as a profit index, not just a technical score.
Hello and welcome to the Beef Edge, the Teagasc Beef podcast, for all your latest news, information and advice for Irish beef farmers. Over the last few years, farmers have become more aware of the commercial beef value, also known as the CBV. In this first part of a two-part podcast series, I'm joined by Research Project Coordinator David Kelly with ICBF, based in the Tully Research Centre. David, before we begin, can you outline what the commercial beef value is?
Commercial beef value, or like I said, the CBV, is a genetic tool that ranks cattle on their genetic potential for profitable beef production. So it focuses on traits that matter to finishers and dry stock farmers. So that's like carcass weight, conformation, age of slaughter, feed intake, the factory specs, docility, and the carbon cost of those traits. So generally, the higher the CBV, the higher the expected profitability from that animal in the beef system. So in simple terms, CBV tells you before we buy or rear the calf how good a beef animal is likely to be.
And in reality, are farmers finishing cattle seeing the measurable margin difference between the high versus the low CBV cattle?
Yes, very clearly. So when we compare the top CBV cattle with the bottom group, we see heavier carcasses, better conformation and kill out, lower feed intake per kilo of gain, and a higher likelihood of hitting those factory specs. So from the national ICBF data and also the data we collect in Tully, we've shown that in dairy beef steers anyway, the top 10% on CBV can be worth roughly 250 to 270 euro more per head than the bottom 10% once carcass and the feed costs are accounted for. So yes, there's a real, very measurable margin gap.
And in relation to the CBV for the continental cattle, what are the indications?
So over the continental type cattle, so those from suckler cows, the CBV is highlighting, so for high-CBV cattle or continentals, very strong carcass weight and conformation, good kill out, and strong ability to hit the U and R grades at a younger age. Regards the low CBV continentals, they may still look the part, but often they have poor feed efficiency and later finishing and more grading variability. So the CBV is effectively separating the genuinely profitable continental genetics from those that are just visually impressive, but might be less efficient behind the scenes.
And in relation to the dairy beef cattle there, you mentioned the 250 to 270 euro. How does that compare when you're looking at, dairy, cross-dairy cattle?
Yeah, so across the national evaluations, the average CBV differs by system. So in the suckler or the continental type cattle, we'll see the highest average CBV in carcass merit in those. For dairy on beef, it's more widespread. So we see some animals rival suckler cattle on CBV, others are much lower. And for the dairy, on average, the lowest CBV, but again, big range. The key message for the CBV is that it lets you find the top end dairy beef animals that overlap with the suckler performance, but also identify the very low merit dairy calves that are hardest to finish profitably.
And from the analysis that you've completed on the CBV, can you see that there's an improvement in the quality of beef calves coming from the dairy herds over the last number of years?
Yes, so we're seeing strong signals and it's moving in the right direction. So more dairy herds are using higher CBV beef sires via the better beef merit in the dairy beef index, higher average CBV in the beef sire dairy calves in many herds, and fewer extremely low CBV calves where CBV is actively used in sire choice. So it's not a magic switch, but the trend is that where CBV is being used, the floor of calf quality is lifting and the proportion of very poor merit calves is also dropping.
So David, over a batch of 100 cattle, what could CBV selection mean for profit at farm level?
Yep, so if we use the Tully type analysis figures as a guide, so the per head differences, like I mentioned before, between the top and bottom 10% of CBV, it's about 250 to 270 euro in profit per head. So over 100 cattle, that's in the region of 25 to 27,000 difference in output and feed costs combined, which is quite substantial. Even if you only move from an average to good CBV, you're still talking many thousands of euro over a 100 head batch. So that's why we describe CBV as a profit index, not just a technical score.
And from your experience, David, is the CBV reducing the risk for finishers that's buying cattle on a weekly basis?
Yes, so that's one of the biggest strengths of the CBV. So, and the feedback we're getting back from finishers themselves. So, with the higher CBV cattle, there's generally less risk of very light or poorly grading cattle. There's less risk of long, drawn-out finishing periods, and there's a lot more predictability in performance and, in particular, kill-out. So, by avoiding low CBV animals, finishers are cutting out the problem cattle that generally drag down margin and tie up sheds and cash and infrastructure. This is especially important nowadays with the new level that beef prices have moved to, which means there's much more money on the table to play for than a couple of years ago.
That's great, David. And what impact does genotyping have on improving the CBV reliability?
So genotyping gives a big step up in reliability. So for genotyped animals, they have more accurate parentage and genomic information feeding back into the CBV calculations. So that means we have more reliable predictions for the main profit traits of carcass, feed intake, and age of slaughter. Only genotyped animals currently display the CBV in the map boards, which is why we're pushing out genotyping so strongly. So yes, genotyping turns CBV from a very good estimator into an excellent decision tool.
Since the CBV was reduced, have national carcass weights or grades improved, David?
So CBV is still relatively new. It was launched in late 2021. So national trends take a bit of time to have an impact. So they're influenced by many factors in terms of markets, feed costs, policy, etc. What we're seeing in the data at the moment is that within the CBV, the band differences are very consistent. So high CBV animals are heavier and better graded. Over time, we hope as more calves are sired by those higher merit beef bulls, we expect that to feed through into national carcass weights and grades. So the early signs are positive at an animal level and a herd level, but the full national impact will build over the coming years and take a bit longer to see the full picture.
And do you think the CBV is influencing breeding decisions at scale, or what are your thoughts?
Yes, and that's accelerating due to the National Genotyping Programme, or the NGP. So we're just on target to genotype over 1 million calves in 2026, and all of these will potentially have a CBV. So a lot more information on a lot larger number of animals. We're seeing that AI companies are now marketing beef bulls on their beef and calving traits. Dairy and suckler discussion groups are using the CBV reports available from ICBF to review performance and inform breeding decisions. And finishers are feeding back to calf suppliers and to marts that CBV matters to them. So we're not at 100% adoption, but CBV is already shaping a large share of beef sire selection decisions and helping inform those breeding decisions more accurately.
And if any farmer listening wants to access the CBV for cattle that they're buying, how can they access it?
So for farmers that are buying cattle in the marts, they can see it on the digital mart boards. So it's available for all genotyped animals. And for farmers that are selling cattle farm to farm, any of those farmers that are signed into Herd Plus are able to export the CBV report on their animals. And so that's very easy to hand over that information.
Finally, David, what impact is CBV having on the research trials currently being carried out in Tully Research Centre?
So that's a great question. So some of the research we're doing now is very much related to kind of future traits around environment, a lot of work on feed efficiency and new techniques to capture a lot of these hard to measure or difficult to record traits that aren't feasible on commercial farms. We're starting now to filter cattle based on CBV for certain trials. So we take in the good and bad within Tully for the research trials, but for some of the trials now, we're starting to filter cattle on CBV so that we can see what is the response from different treatments based on the genetic potential of the animals. So we're seeing, does different feed additives have the same impact based on the different genetics, or what's the impact of the rumen microbiome for different genetic merit cattle depending on the CBV. So it's still in the pipeline and very much a bit of a further time away from widespread adoption. But yes, we're generally using the CBV a lot more now for putting cattle into groups. So for the likes of the hard to record traits like feed intake and other carcass traits that aren't feasible on commercial farms, we're using that data on a widespread number of cattle across dairy beef and continentals to help validate the CBV. So we're using that data to feed back to farmers to provide confidence that the CBV works for not only overall carcass merit, but also for overall production efficiency and including the costs in the system.
That's great, David. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
That's all for this week's episode, and my thanks to David for joining me on the show. You can catch up on all other shows and interviews from the Beef Edge podcast on the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie, or you can listen on Apple as well as Spotify. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe so you never miss a show. For all other updates from our beef programme, keep an eye on our Twitter and Facebook pages. Until next time, I'm Catherine Egan, and thanks for listening.